crimes of torture, murder, kidnap, and the rest of it. So I think it's excellent. I mean, Mr. Pinochet is on his way to jail. He won't go, actually, because the Chileans are very forgiving, and he's successfully pleaded mental disorder. But he's ended his days indicted. I think possibly General Suharto of Indonesia will go the same way. Henry Kissinger was hit, oddly enough, on the 10th of September this year in Washington, D.C., in a federal court with a suit which will be found to have standing by the relatives of a Chilean officer who he had murdered in Santiago in 1970. It's taken a long time to catch up with him, but the law has a long arm and a long memory.
What was your travel route to Pakistan and Afghanistan?
Well, actually, it was an odd dogleg route because I had an appointment in Calcutta that I had to keep first with a brilliant photographer called Sebastião Salgado, who I'm sure some of your audience know. He's a wonderful, excuse me, wonderful Brazilian photographer. He's basically photographed the Third World. He's done exploitation of labor, rape of natural resources, refugees, migrants, war, 5 or 6 major albums of work. And he's now the World Health Organization's, envoy, ambassador for the eradication of polio, which you'll be glad to hear is nearly done now. By 2004, probably most countries will report in that polio has gone. And West Bengal is one of the places where that's been fought for the hardest. And I went for Vanity Fair with him. We're going to do a big portfolio of his pictures on the struggle against polio. And it was a real honor to go around Calcutta with such a guy. So when I'd done that, I rushed off via New Delhi to Islamabad.
And then did you drive to the Afghan border?
I did.
What was
actually,
that like?
I got someone to do that for me because I felt I needed someone who spoke Pashtun.
How long did it take?
Oh, from Islamabad to Peshawar, it takes you about 3 hours, I would say. It's very near, frighteningly near in some ways. And when you're in Peshawar, in some ways you're in Afghanistan. It's an Afghan town. That border is very wobbly line drawn, as you know. And it's full of Afghan refugees. Very, very tense atmosphere at the moment.
And you went, is it Balliol College in Oxford?
Yes.
How many colleges comprise Oxford?
I think it's about 23. There's no such thing as a campus as such in Oxford. It's just around the middle of the town, which is a wonderful old medieval city. There are about, I would say now it's above 24, walled-in, enclosed buildings, cloistered buildings, each of them self-governing. So there's no such place as Oxford University, really. It's a mystery. We used to laugh, it was a favorite joke actually about American tourists, I'm sorry to say, when I was a kid. You'd meet as someone looking very stranded, wearing Bermuda shorts, asking directions for the university, and you say, well, I can't help you. But you can come and have tea in my college if you like.
Our next call is from Oxford,
This is how we make people feel at home, you see.
Go ahead, caller. How many colleges? How many colleges at Oxford? Is it 23? You know?
I don't know. I thought it was 27, actually.
Fair enough. Well, there are a couple of new ones since I was there.
Okay.
And of course now girls can share in all this too.
Including Chelsea Clinton.
Indeed, yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, caller.
No, that's okay. I was at a meeting of the Oxford University Historical Society at Balliol the other night, just to make you feel at home.
Very much so.
And I very much appreciate your writing, especially in Vanity Fair, and the other work that goes on in that magazine, which is very good.
Thank you.
And I do wonder a little bit about the current crisis, whether I very much agree that this is an issue of the secular Enlightenment versus various sorts of fundamentalism. And I'm wondering against that background whether at least part of the problem is not the widespread cynicism in the world about the United States and the role of moral leadership being given President Bush is trying to give that moral leadership, so are other people in America. But that's undermined consistently by the sorts of issues that you've discussed already, the US policies in South America, Latin America, and other parts of the world. And isn't it the case that to align this, the United States has to join in with the internationalization of justice and become a full participant in all of those activities, including the bringing to justice of war criminals and the identification of the dead hand of corporations involved in bringing about wars and so on?
Well, I'm I'm not completely out of sympathy with what you say, and I know exactly what you mean by what you say as well. But here's what I think. If there was to be a list of the top 10 scribblers working in Washington, the top 10 critics of U.S. foreign policy, I would hope to have made that list by now. If I didn't make it, I would feel bad. And if I was told I was on the top 10, I'd feel I'd come by it honestly. And I think some people watching know what I mean by that. I would yield to nobody, and that's what I meant when I wrote the Kissinger book. But I don't think, in some sense, I don't think this has anything to do with that. The Al-Qaeda attack was not on that. The Al-Qaeda attack was directly on American civil society. The Al-Qaeda people are trying to impose fascism on the Muslim world, have succeeded in imposing it in one country already. They hope to win their argument in the Muslim world by bringing it to the streets of the West. This is an unbelievably fierce challenge, therefore. As I said earlier, it's impossible for it to succeed, but it can do a great deal of damage meanwhile. Therefore, whether President Bush says he's against it or not should be irrelevant to you or to me. The question is, how against it are you? What are you going to do about it? I think to start the argument by clearing the throat and taking a step back and say, well, let's first deconstruct American foreign policy would be an error. I mean, those arguments go on anyway. They'll have to go on anyway. I'm not going to change my side on any of them. But the question is, do you recognize this as a challenge to yourself, to your own society? Do you feel solidarity with the other societies that are being mauled and profaned by this kind of theocratic fascism? And if so, what are you doing to help them out and build, intensify that solidarity?
This is our guest's latest book. It's called The Art of Mentoring, Letters to a Young Contrarian, dedicated to the memory of Peter Sedgwick. Who was he?
Peter Sedgwick was a man I met just as I was going to Oxford. He was a teacher there, not a very well-known author outside his field, which was actually psychiatry, and the relationship of psychiatry to politics. And I met him when I must have been 17 or 18, at a meeting, since we're staying with the old town. It was actually in Oxford Town Hall. It was a rally against the atrocious war in Vietnam. And I asked a question to some communist speaker, a hostile question. And at the end of the meeting, this man came up to me and said, I thought that was a good argument you had, and blah, blah. And anyway, we became friends, and when I went away to teach, which was not long after that, while I was waiting to go to Oxford, I taught in a boys' school down in the Western Peninsula in Devonshire. And we began to correspond. And he was very good. He answered all my letters. He sent me books he thought I should read. He introduced me to all kinds of subjects I'd been unaware of. So I always, when people ask me for advice, or if I have a student who would like some of my time outside class, I always try to do it. And I always try and think that it's paying back Peter, who, alas, is no longer with us. He died appallingly young and in a very pointless way.
Next call is Geneva, Switzerland. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a big fan of yours.
Yeah.
And
what can I say?
Just because your honesty, your relative clear thought and honesty, as opposed to the dancing. And my question is about the dancing, because it's just now that we're getting a sense of what the Al Jazeera network might be like, and I'm wondering about its funding and economics, and I'm wondering about the balance that CNN may or may not provide in the Muslim world for information, and whether or not it makes sense to set up something like an infomercial type 24-hour news broadcast so that Arabs can actually hear other Arabs and get other information and points of view that are bent towards specifically giving them the information. I know they're already doing radio, but obviously visual, whenever it's opportune, is always more impacting. And, the infomercials, the mild distortions, are the mild distortions are only mild in many respects.
I'll stop you there. Thanks for the call.
Well, I I didn't think there was any mystery about the financing of Al Jazeera. I thought we knew that it was the Sultan of Qatar who